still kind of see him as this like
They're
romantic,
like, oh, I
misunderstood
wish, like
guy,
Joe.
and he's literally a serial killer.
Hi everyone, welcome to Lovecast the BL podcast. I'm your host Alexa, and I have the whole Love team with me today. Kayla, Pixie, and Heather are all here.
Hey.
Hi.
Yay! So we've got a big topic to discuss today, and we have invited the perfect person to join us for that discussion. Everyone, please welcome Shawn, also known as Synergic, to the show.
Hello, it's so nice to be here.
We are so happy to have you on for this discussion. We have a lot to get to, talking around mental health in BL and everything in that sphere. But before we get into it, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your content in the BL space?
Sure. So, I guess first and foremost, my name is Shawn. I do have a master's degree in clinical psychology. My area of concentration was in not a great dinner topic, but sexual victimization. That's where all of my research had been. Now I create BL content. I do reactions. I tend to do my reactions. I always say that I have a duality. I have Shawn and Synergic. Synergic's the fun guy just talking about boys, and then Shawn comes in every once in a while and has a good time and talks about mental health or something serious. But now I'm kind of doing the DramaLlama thing. I'm the
Creating an
founder of
app.
DramaLllama.
Yeah.
We're creating a whole platform for BL. and we're starting the beta testing, all that fun stuff now. So it's going.
So exciting.
That's so
Yeah.
exciting.
Can't wait for everybody to see it finally.
Yes, we have been along for the journey. I feel like almost since the start, we had at least had it on our radar and kind of talking with a lot of the Drama Llama team over the past couple months. We've been hearing a lot about it, and I'm just so excited to see it start to come to fruition more.
Yeah, it's almost there. We got a couple more, like we're doing the testing, like I said, and we're doing closed at the moment, then we'll do open, and then, in a couple months we'll start releasing it for everybody to get their hands on.
So
But it's
exciting.
there. It exists.
That's amazing.
That's so cool.
Soon. So
Yeah.
soon.
That's so cool.
Getting close.
Yeah, that's going to be so cool to have, I guess, had this idea and then seeing it come to fruition. Like, that's so cool.
It's been a journey because I started the idea, I don't know, it was a little over a year ago, and started convincing people to come along. I've been the Pied Piper in that, I've just been convincing people to come along and join in. We have 12 people kind of who believe in it, not one making a dollar off of it, just wanting to do it just to build something together. And it's been a crazy journey, a great journey. It's something that I never thought that I would do, for sure, being somebody in clinical psychology, but here we are.
Yeah, it's like the definition of a passion project, honestly.
Yes. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. I'm excited for y'all to see it finally. I can't, like, it's hard for me to rein it in sometimes,
I get
and
it.
not spoil everything.
Yeah. Got to keep the surprises for the people.
Yeah.
Sorry, we'll have to have you back on at some point when you do like a proper release just to talk all about
DramaLlama
it.
sesh. Yes.
Y'all are gonna get the spoilers.
We love spoilers here.
We love spoilers. Yeah.
Yeah, anytime. Feel free.
Yeah,
Anytime.
we will take you up on that. All right. Well, today, as we mentioned briefly, we're talking about BL and psychological themes, kind of mental health depictions in romance and BL dramas and what that looks like. So I was actually thinking about this when I was doing the run sheet. I don't know if it's an international holiday, but in the US May is Mental Health Awareness Month, so I'm not sure if that's a thing that is recognized elsewhere in the world, but it felt very timely to be doing this episode during May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month here. So it felt like kind of a right place to put it on the Lovecast schedule. So yeah, the way we've kind of broken things up, we split things up into countries. So the idea is just to kind of go through each country, you know, if we have some examples of how mental health or psychological issues have been depicted in BLs in that country, kind of go over those and talk a little bit about the good and the bad, how they handle these topics in different BLs in these varying countries, you know. All right, so jumping right in, the first country we had on the list is Japan. So, what topics do we usually see in the mental health sphere depicted in BLs in Japan?
Yeah, so I think like the biggest one there is like work related struggles, especially well, like I'm not from Japan, but from what you hear and from what you can see from their media, they are vastly overworked. Like I was listening to like a British person who worked as an English teacher in Japan and was talking about how they would be rewarded for coming to work and not working. Like it didn't matter if you were actually working at work, you just had to be there. If you weren't there, you would be like almost bullied because you weren't at work. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that's the big one that we see in a lot of BLs in Japan. I think, you know, we'd see a lot of like workplace based BL dramas in Japan, and a lot of them talk about issues of being overworked and how to assert yourself in the workplace and not being able to do that, and the stress and anxiety that comes from that, dealing with bosses that treat you like crap, and how that impacts you and impacts your ability to work properly and all that kind of stuff. So I know recently I watched, well, I guess it was a couple months ago at this point, but Perfect Propose, which really kind of captured all of those things perfectly. This person who is overworked, his boss treats him like crap, he has no self-worth because of it, he doesn't think his work is good enough, and all of those things do weigh on you a lot mentally, even when you're the little time that you do have outside of work. Like you can't help but think about work and how that brings you down. So yeah, I think that's one of the big examples we see from Japan.
I definitely appreciate the at least with Japanese BLs, showing the more adult side of things. I think showing a little bit more of the adult problems that come up, you know, whether it's work or whatever. You just see, in my opinion, you just see a little bit more of, well, a little bit more of the maturity in some of the characters and even the way that they're written sometimes. I just enjoy that in general.
Definitely.
I agree.
Yeah. It's been, I actually don't know if I've talked about this on the recording yet, but I feel like they've been hitting a little bit too close to home lately, because like my work for the past few months has been like, it's been a lot. And so like I've been sitting here watching these, like, you know, watching Perfect Propose, which is probably the most recent one I've watched, and just been like, this is a little bit too real right now. And it's like you appreciate it, but at the same time you're like, am I in the right headspace to be taking this in outside of work as well? But I do appreciate it. It's nice to see there's a certain like way that Japanese dramas incorporate that realism that I think helps really make them hit, which I do appreciate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Old Fashioned Cupcake was one of my favorite, like all-time favorite BLs. Definitely my favorite Japanese one. And I really I loved how they were showing off like the struggles of age gap, boss and underling.
Worker.
Yeah,
Underling is a choice.
and also like the societal standard for being a man and what you're allowed to do as a man. It's
100%.
just everything like was so well framed,
Mm.
and it wasn't a long show either. I just felt like the pacing of it and everything they like got like in the forefront, and it didn't feel like they were like pushing it down your throat. It was just like, it's here.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I feel like the other, kind of swinging it in a different direction, but the other show that immediately comes to mind when you're talking about like psych issues in BL in Japan is My Beautiful Man. And we have talked about My Beautiful Man so much on Lovecast since
too
the
much.
first season came out. And I feel like we'll never get tired of talking about it, but those characters and their psychological journey over the course of the 2 seasons of the show and the movie is just like what a complex, like such interestingly complicated characters, and so fun's not the right word, so you get so, I don't know, attached to watching them go on their journey and kind of working through obsessed, yeah.
Yeah, you come along the obsession with them.
Yeah.
You kind of
Yeah.
build that obsession with them, and then you're just like right there, ready to see the unhingedness because you are so obsessed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
was someone
I was just gonna say
Yeah.
that I just love the perspective shift in that
Mhm.
series, particularly. You know, if you don't watch, like, there's so many people who have just stopped watching it and don't get to that next to last
Yeah.
episode, and then they don't see that nice little perspective shift. They don't get to realize that we're looking at or seeing this story through one perspective only. And then you get to that perspective shift, and it's such a eye-opening and quite honestly a good lesson maybe for some of us, that we are, at least in our lives, seeing everything from one perspective and not necessarily from other perspectives.
Yeah.
There's 2
100%.
sides to every story.
At least.
Yeah.
At least.
At least.
Yeah, no, I remember my like I like brain exploded watching that episode. Like I remember we started discussing it right away. Like it was crazy just how everything just, it sort of had this feeling of falling into place. Like they're a mess, I know, but it so much made sense.
Yeah, it's a type of show that really does a good job of helping you to understand why the characters act the way that they act, and part of that does come with sticking along for that perspective change in the end. And I feel like the story is very much connected, so even if you only watch the first season, I feel like you don't get like the full journey of both of the characters and what they've gone on through the second season in the movie. So yeah, I just feel like it does such a great job of writing interesting, complex, complicated characters.
I saw some people drop it because they were saying it was toxic, and I'm just like,
Yeah.
that's the point.
Well, that brings up like the idea of when does like depicting the toxicity and romanticizing it, where's that line?
Yeah, absolutely.
That is a great question.
I think
that
My
is a great
Beautiful Man. Yeah,
That's
I
such
think
a gray area. Sorry.
No, all good. I was just gonna say, I think My Beautiful Man is a good show that treads that line and I maybe steps over it a little bit and then like jumps back and then puts their toe back over and then jumps back. Like it's a really good show, or I think anyway. It took me a while to get there, but I think it's a really good show that makes you question, I guess, why you like this, what could be considered unhinged, very unhealthy, could be considered very, well, might be, I don't know, could be considered very unhealthy type of relationship, and how it developed and how each person sees themselves within this relationship. because that's the other thing, like Hira sees himself as like not on the same level as Kyoi, even though he wants to be a part of his life and he wants to be in a relationship with him. He doesn't actually see himself on the same level.
Yeah.
And for a very long time, and I think it only takes to like literally right at the end of their entire story that he kind of accepts that Kyoi isn't this like guy that needs to, this god that needs to be on a pillar. Like he is a human being, flesh and blood, has his own feelings, should not be idolized. Like it's only right at the end when he realizes this and accepts, I guess, his place within this relationship equally. But the whole time as a viewer, you're also just like, yes, be obsessed, put him on that pedestal, but don't actually put him on that pedestal, but don't actually be that obsessed. But I want to watch it, and I want to watch this unhingedness and this like obsession. And like, what is it with this idea of finding obsession, or like finding this watching characters who are so obsessed with their love interest? Like, what is it that kind of has us attached to this? Because I feel like definitely in BL, we all, and I'm speaking in like sweeping generalizations, we all, I feel, attach ourselves to like the stories that have little bits of obsession. My Beautiful Man, a lot of obsession. Love in the Air when we get there well, we might, I don't know, but Love in the Air in Thailand, obsession there as well. Like we kind of gravitate towards some shows, or at least the storylines become BLs that have a little bit of this like unhingedness in how this character feels about the other character.
I think it has a lot to do with social norms and how we're allowed to be versus how like sort of like daydreaming, okay, could we do that, right? Like it's the forbidden fruit. That's what I think like makes it so interesting. And for me with My Beautiful Man, it was a lot to do with that I never questioned if that relationship was toxic or not. Like I was watching through that, like that is 100% toxic. We're not, like I genuinely believe that throughout the whole thing, which with some other shows that I've seen that has more like toxic relationships in them, might be like trying to fool you that it's romantic and it's okay and all of that, and you see fans not understanding that it's toxic. Like you're kind of trying to gloss over the toxic part of it. And My Beautiful Man never did that. Like it's pure toxic, and you can't say that it's not.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, you were kind of going back to that thing that Kayla mentioned of like walking that line of like depicting something versus romanticizing it, which I think kind of goes into that discussion about obsession. But I also think, like, going back to the original, Heather's original question, that there's just like kind of what you were saying, Pixie, like something appealing to an extent about someone being so in love with you that like they're willing to go to any lengths. And I think obviously, you know, like your logical brain knows that like in real life, like, you know, you wouldn't want to see someone in a relationship like this, or you wouldn't necessarily want someone obsessed with you to that extent. But when you're watching it in a fictional realm, you're like, wow, this person is in love with this other person to this extent that they're willing to do this much. And there's like it's like the ultimate form of romance, albeit unhealthy, you know? And I think there's appeal as a viewer in that kind of romance, because we know it's just like not something you necessarily want in real life, but in fiction it hits a little bit harder.
And it reminds me of the way that the show, and this is not BL, the way that the show You just took off, and everyone was like saying that I can't remember who the main character is.
All I know is
What his
Dan
name
from
is,
Gossip
Joe?
Girl.
Joe?
Yeah, that's his name.
Joe.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dan from
how
Gossip Girl.
everyone Dan from Gossip Girl. Yeah, how everyone for a very long period of time, and even kind of after like 3 seasons or however many seasons, still kind of see him as this like
You're
romantic,
like, oh, I
misunderstood
wish, like
guy.
Joe.
And he's literally a serial killer. He
Yeah.
stalks
Yeah.
and kills people.
Yeah.
Like, and he's very he has a lot of issues.
Mhm.
But like it just kind of, but that show, and me myself saying this as well because I loved that show,
Mhm.
is so interesting to watch because of this like level of how far is too far, how far can you push this idea of like I am so in love with you that I will do everything for you, how far can you push this obsession. And I don't know, I feel like I'm still going back to this whole like how like why is this idea of, I know you've answered it, but like why is this idea of obsession so romantic's not the word I want to use, but so enticing sometimes.
I mean, as long as
Yeah.
it's not happening to me.
Or real people in real life.
Yeah, it's
real
like if
people
we're
in real
keeping
life.
it in fiction. Like we're keeping it in
Yeah.
fiction, and you know what? It's fine to enjoy that in fiction if you want to. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Like I love the slightly obsessed, slightly unhinged characters. Like I'll say it, I'll admit it. I know a lot of us here do. I enjoy them because I find them really interesting to watch, and I love the I guess fantasy of it all. That part. Like I don't know if fantasy is the right word, but like I love that fictional storytelling aspect of those characters, and that how interesting that is, because like I love the fluff is great. Green flag characters are amazing, love them, we need them, but sometimes I like the red flag ones too, not to the point of like actually abusing people, but borderline, no, not borderline, but like
I mean,
color mixing in there.
color mixing, the orange flags. Well, I don't know. Is there an orange flag?
What I've seen, like Japanese BLs have they are so good at tiptoeing that line between like being unacceptable
They really
to being
are.
like, okay, well, this is bad, but I like it.
Mm.
I know,
Right.
I really like what's it called? The cornered mouse dreams of cheese.
I still have it.
Very toxic relationship. It's all very toxic, but I loved it. It was very gray.
I feel like somebody recently suggested that to me. Now I'm hearing it again, and maybe I.
It was one
Time
of
to
the
add it to
first
the list.
Japanese
Yeah.
BLs I watched. So
Oh.
it's a little older now, but it's very good.
Oh, I'll have to check that out.
Mm.
I mean, as far as upset, I wonder how much of this is just me thinking out loud. I wonder how much of this is what we do to some of these celebrities who are playing these characters as well. We put them on
Parasocial
pedestal.
relationships.
Yes,
Yes.
parasocial relationships,
Mhm,
absolutely. We put them on the pedestal. We some individuals become very obsessive,
Very, yeah.
as we've seen time and time again. Whether it's K-pop or whether it's BL, we some individuals really do put these idols, put these celebrities, actors up on these pedestals and have this obsessive quality. And I wonder how much of that is just being able to see that obsession coming out through the screen and identifying with that sometimes.
It's a really good point.
And trying to self-insert almost. Like I wish
Yeah.
that was me who that person was obsessed with.
I mean, look at Hiro. I mean, literally following.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is
yeah.
idol worship.
Self-inserted himself into an actual
Yeah.
relationship.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I feel like that we had a lot more just to that obsession topic really got us thinking. But yeah,
My
I
brain
mean,
woke up. I told you,
the
half
br-
hour in.
the-
Half hour in, my
Heather
brain woke
suddenly,
up.
my beautiful man brought her back into it.
Brought me back to life. I'm Mushu. Back to life.
Yeah, so the next country we had on the list was South Korea. And I think the biggest and first example that came to mind for me with the topic of mental health in South Korea was The Eighth Sense. And specifically, one of the things that is most interesting about that show that I've seen in very few, if any, other BLs was that they showed Jaewon's therapy sessions throughout the show. And those conversations with his therapist were a way to reveal the trauma that he's been through to the audience, walk through his PTSD. It helped us understand his relationship with, I'm blanking on the other character's name right now.
Me too.
It helped us understand the lens of which he was approaching his relationship. And I don't know, I just think it was so interesting because I mean, I've seen therapy sessions depicted in other Asian dramas before, but specifically in BL, I don't think I've seen that many, or not
Doesn't
that many that
happen a
came
lot,
to
yeah.
mind. So I think that was one thing about the way this drama approached mental health and psychological health that really, really makes it stand out.
Yeah, and it being Korean in particular is just kind of interesting too. Korea is not exactly known for mental health. I mean, they're starting to have a lot more series, I would say, coming out,
Yeah.
even just K-dramas outside of BL depicting mental health issues. So it's nice that it kind of bled into BLs, in my opinion. And like I said, like you said, I think that they handled it very beautifully. You know, PTSD is difficult, even as a clinician, it's something difficult to recognize and to, because so many of the symptoms can present as other mental health issues. It's so hard sometimes to dig in to what's actually going on. Is this actually PTSD, or is this just depression? And I think that they did a pretty great job overall with that, you know, depicting everything that kind of went on, depicting the sessions. You know, we can get into the nitty-gritty. Well, I remember having, I don't even remember specifically what, but I remember kind of going with some of the therapy. But you know, but
It's like
that's
the
to be
occupational.
expected.
You have to turn off your brain when you're actually watching. You're like, this is not how this would go, but okay. But like in general, the heart was there.
Yeah. The series tend to go a little bit more in the pop psych realm, so you know, which is lagging by like 100 years. So
yeah. Also, the other thing that I wanted to mention from that series was like the explicit mention of Jaewon being on medication, because I think there's a lot of conversations around what being on medication indicates. It's very demonized, I think, in the general sphere of discussing mental health issues. You know, if you're on medication, then something's really wrong with you, you know? So, and I say that as someone who is on antidepressants, like, you know, I'm playing off of that. But, you know, having them mention that Jaewon is on meds and, you know, that is part of his treatment for his mental health and his issues that he's going through, I just think is so important to start having more open discussions. And I think that is something that is being more openly discussed both in TV and just in the general sphere around mental health. There's been a lot more open discussion around people being on medication, people being feeling like they can be a lot more open about discussing being on medication and what that means for them and what it does for them. But you know, I think it's another thing that like hearing that mentioned in a drama is just something that you don't get that often. So is another thing I appreciated about his character.
yeah, and the fact that he was actually taking meds while in therapy is important to me, honestly.
Doing both of them. Not just one or the other.
I feel in the US it can be a little I think sometimes people rely sometimes a little bit too much on medication. They see it as the easier option, whereas efficacy wise, it's really meant to get you through that tough spot. If you're coming in with severe depression, that's where it's meant to really kind of lift you up maybe a little bit quicker or not make it so deep for you. Whereas, efficacy wise, how effective therapy there's plenty of research to show that therapy is the most effective
absolutely.
form of treating mental health. And doing both in combination is certainly going to help you get through that tough spot. Really, probably the best.
Yeah, I think there's like a lot of places in the world where therapy is still very stigmatized. I know that like here in Norway, like people still, like, especially if you go to my parents' generation and older, they don't recognize therapy as a thing. Like, we don't believe in it. And I was just like, okay, it's not faith, but fine. So they're more likely to get medication than actually going to therapy. But there's been movements, like it's you're seeing it in shows, you're seeing it among young people on social media. There's more talk, there's more openness in general around stuff.
I think with like so many things, it's a generational thing, honestly. I think with our, younger generations, it's much more widely accepted. And I think most of that is, again, there are a lot of bad things that come from social media. But when you grow up talking to a whole heck of a lot of different types of people, there's some great things that can come out of that. And one of them in particular is the discussions about mental health, I think.
100%. Yeah.
In South Korean society right now, what issues do you think they're dealing with that would cause there to be more visibility in the media for mental health issues?
I mean, I think, in general, there is a very, very, especially in younger kids, there is with their education system and the emphasis that they put on education and performance in school. Korea is one of those countries that has very high suicide rates in teenagers and young adults. And I think very similar to Japan, it's also a country where people are working a lot and not, similar to Japan, similar to America, working a lot and not making enough money to live off of it. Like, not even like we have the same issue here. And I think that has also, same as in maybe in Korea and other countries in America, there's a lot more talk now about how capitalism is a direct line to some people's mental health decline and stuff like that. And I think kind of what Shawn was saying with the internet and being able to connect to different cultures and different people that you wouldn't necessarily be connected to in your everyday life, it's opening up more discussion for, you might not be able to go into your workplace and say, this is fucked up, like I shouldn't be treated like this, but you have a space online or somewhere else where those feelings are recognized and validated. And so I feel like that leads to more courage for people to start having these bigger discussions, and it kind of creates I don't know what word I'm looking for is, but creates like I don't know. Yes, that works. To kind of like get it to like bigger audiences and have it become something that's more acceptable to be discussed in K-drama or BL or whatever form of media you might be seeing this stuff depicted in.
Yeah, I mean, before, when we didn't have as much social media and stuff, like, you wouldn't even know that your life sucked. Kind of, you were just miserable.
Like, this is just life.
But you thought it was normal. Like,
Yeah.
this is just how it is. It's not. It's like that for everyone. Just there's something wrong with you for thinking that you're not having the greatest time. But with the openness now that everyone can see, like, yeah, that's not normal. I do think, like, in South Korea, they also have like a big issue, I've heard, with their population decreasing, or they're they're not having
People aren't
babies.
having kids. Yeah.
Which is probably what do you call it? It's probably because of the culture and how strict
People
they've been
can't
about
afford to.
school
Yeah.
and consumerism and everything. They can't afford to anymore. They don't have the time because they're studying or working too much. Like, yeah.
It's also like an effect of how women have been treated in Korean
Yes,
society,
yes.
violence against women, as well as, I guess, the sexual violence against women, and the demonization of women and sexuality, and just this idea of gender roles and gender norms, and all of that has kind of all become this, is it the 3B movement? 4B movement?
4B movement. Yeah.
4B movement. It's kind of all resulted in women taking a stand like that. And I think that in terms of kind of like tying it back with, I guess, the overall topic of mental health, this idea that you are always told that you are like second best. You have these very strict norms that you have to follow, and that if you are violently attacked, what, like 50% of the time, 80% of the time, nothing's going to happen. You just got to get better, get over it, move on. There's no help, there's no support, there's no
no one believes you, right?
Yeah, and or not even that, like they might believe you, but nothing's going to be done about it. And I think that really can affect your mental health and your feelings of self-worth, and that, I guess, then becoming this huge movement that's affecting men, and so now it's an issue is is a lot. And I could go into it further and say some very things that's probably not most appropriate here, but like it's I think that that is like, actually, sorry, I don't even know how to finish that thought. I'm just like,
do you think like the ramp up of like showing like therapy and stuff like mental health things in K-dramas and in KBLs and stuff is because most, like, in general, there's a higher percentage of women watching it and pushing?
I think it's just a reflection of and this is going back to the talk of generations. I think it's just a reflection of what the younger generations in Korea are most passionate about, most focused on, most open-minded about, and that is starting to show up in the popular culture and the media. Which is a great thing, and we've seen that happen in American TV shows, in Australian TV shows. You've just mentioned that it's happening in Norway. Like, it's been happening for a bit over this side, and we're starting to really see it happen in the, I guess, Asian media that we're consuming.
I also think that can be tied to the globalization of Korean media and Asian media in general. A lot more dramas are wanting to appeal to Western audiences, and they're getting a lot bigger in the Western audience, and just outside of just Asia, where they've been popular for decades now. So things like one of the K-dramas I can think of, like Daily Dose of Sunshine, which was a Netflix original that was a show about a nurse in a psych ward. I don't know if that's something that we would have seen even 5 years ago, but because Netflix is making original K-dramas now, and the world has its eyes on Korean media and Asian media a lot more than it did 5 to 10 years ago. I think companies are a lot more willing to take risks with the media they're depicting. Directors, writers, actors. I think everyone's a lot more interested, eager, and willing to kind of branch out of the stereotypical K-drama that you imagine from like 2016 or something like that.
Well, that reminds me of like So talking about previously, I know we're kind of off the topic of BL, so we'll stay
Okay, it's
for
all
a
good.
bit.
Tangents.
Talking about love the tangent. Talking about the student culture, the studying culture, the all of that, and it just reminds me of Boys Over Flowers and the bullying that happened in school, but like it was just accepted that she dealt with it, and then like there was never any talk of talk it out, let's help, let's figure it out, how are you doing, how is this affecting you and your mental health, like no, there's no talk of that. And that was a show from the early 2000s, no
2008, 2009,
so
I think, something
not
like that.
early 2000, well early, no, not early 2000s,
Before
but
the 2010s.
before the 2010s. And think like what now, in if there was a show, like if there was a Boys Over Flowers in Korea again, do you think that they would change things to kind of show more of the effect on Gandhi? I can't remember her name.
Can't remember the name.
I know I've just butchered it twice. But like, do you think that they would show more of an effect on her and her mental health, and like how bad it actually was to bully, opposed to this cat and mouse game, and like, oh, this is just how he's showing his affection type of thing?
I think of something like The Glory, which I have not personally watched it, but the whole basis of the show is like this woman who was severely bullied, like, you know, like there's a lot of jokes about how like Korean, like bullying in Korean dramas is on a different level. Like this woman was like burned, like she had a lot of shit happen to her in high school, this character, and the show is basically about her making her entire adult life about getting revenge on the people who bullied her in high school. I have not watched it because I've heard about some of the triggers and they're just not things that I can handle. But I think there's something to be said about a show explicitly making the bullies the victims, which not the victims, the villains is the word I was looking for, of the show, and explicitly making the person who was the victim, the bully, showing sympathy towards her, you know, showing her point of view in a way that shows that what happened to her is explicitly wrong. Now, The Glory wasn't a romance drama, so, you know, I think if we're getting into the romance side of things, which Boys Over Flowers kind of had, you know, the, oh, you know, he's mean to you because he likes you type vibe. I don't know if like a romance K-drama would go quite that far to be like, oh, he's the main lead, but he was still very like, you know, he explicitly did something bad. I don't know that they would, because, you know, they want the male lead to be likable. But I think there is something to say about there being shows existing now that depict bullying where the bully is the villain and they get their comeuppance as the villain of the show.
Yeah, I would be very interested, like, if someone did like a case study on Boys Over Flower and all the remakes and see how they
track it through the years,
evolved over the years, because the Thai version that just like came out is a lot different than the original.
Yeah.
And it would just be interesting to see like a comparison.
Definitely. I feel like something has to exist like that
Yeah,
somewhere on the internet.
Someone find it and tell me, please.
Send it to us.
Someone's made one of those like 10-hour video essays somewhere on the internet, and I would like to watch the whole thing.
I will watch the whole thing. Let me know.
All right. I mean, any final thoughts? We did kind of go off on a tangent there about mental health in Korean BL, South Korean media, before we move into the next section. No? Yes? Sorry, I did. It just comes out automatically. I watched a TikTok about that the other day. That like some Australian guy was like, why am I in America hearing people say no, like the way I would say it. He's like, what has the internet done to my...
Every time I hear it, I'm just like,
It just comes out naturally. I'm so sorry.
Okay. No, it's so it's funny. It's funny. It's just funny now. So I'm like, oh god. Yeah. No, we all sound so bogan.
No. Hey. we have it here too.
It's funny. Yeah, I can't think of anything else to add for South Korea. Because like I'm trying to think of like what other that shows
I don't
that
think
show
there's many with KBL.
There's not a lot
struggles
KBLs
or
that go into mental health. Like you can like any of like Where Your Eyes Linger, To My Star, Semantic Error might like have a tiny, but there's not a lot of.
I think there's a lot.
Not that it's like a main point of the story.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of, and this is just BL in general, where a character clearly has something going on. Like when I was thinking of this list, I was like, so many of these BL boys have experienced like severe trauma or had something very serious happen to them, but it's not like really addressed in the show in a way that like makes it, I would say, where mental health is like the point of the character. But you know, like, so there's so much like parental abuse, trauma, like that kind of stuff that we know or that we learn is like the backstory of this character. Like, you know, I'm thinking of, what is the one we just watched? Unintentional Love Story, where the secondary character, like, you get this backstory that his parents kicked him out because he was outed as being gay, and he was taken in by the aunt of the person he was in love with. And it's like, you know, that is something very serious that impacts your mental health, but like, it's not, I feel like it wasn't a focal point of the story to kind of like, you know.
I think from before, like, it's not as much anymore, but BL often has the premise that love will fix all your problems. So like, okay,
heavily on the fantasy
health, but
like
love fixes it, so it's fine. But we didn't work through anything.
Yep.
All right, so excuse me. So the next country we had on our list was Taiwan. And so I think one of the big ones that we notice shows up a lot in Taiwanese BLs is grief. And Heather was just like listing out examples of like, make our days count, grief, we best love, grief, my tooth, your love, grief. So like, I think that's, I mean, obviously make our days count is probably one of the big ones that people think of when they're thinking about grief.
Trapped was a lot about grief too.
Yeah, I'm literally just like, there is a lot of loss in these dramas and a lot of showing how characters navigate that and how it reflects on their character in current times, their relationship, and that kind of thing. So I think that loss and grief is a big one we see in the Taiwanese BL sphere.
And I think it's so interesting because we're joking that, oh my god, grief is just throughout all of these Taiwanese BLs, but the way that people interact with grief and then the way that then shapes their character is different in like all of these shows. So like My Tooth, Your Love, grief became this like dental phobia. Like the grief of his losing his parents in this accident became like dental, like this phobia to do with was it rain and like dentist and like there was this whole thing because I think he was meant to go to the dentist. I'm pulling this from like the recesses of my brain. He was meant to go to the dentist. He lied and said he didn't want to go, or he disappeared for a bit. His parents were trying to get back during a storm. They had an accident. They died. He then had this grief, like this phobia of going to the dentist or like something like that. That's one way that it kind of developed his character. And then you've got Make Our Days Count, where the last episode is literally all to do with grief, all to do with how
we were working through that grief with him because we were all in mourning.
Like, that's the thing as well. I found that so fascinating that
episode.
we all like as an audience we were kind of working through that grief with him at the same time in that last episode, and like him not exactly letting go, but him finally coming to this realization that he can't stay stuck in his grief and in the past, and he's got to move through it. He doesn't have to let go of it, but he's got to move through it. And then the other characters as well, Sambo and oh my god, I can't remember the other guy's name. And like the older guy's kind of I guess trauma. He also got kicked out when he was found out when like he got cut off from his family when they found out that he was gay, and he wanted to live with his partner at the time or something, and then that relationship broke down, and so he closed himself off to love as a result. And that opening up and then dealing with that trauma where Sambo actually helps him reconnect with his family, and him moving through that trauma, not having to let go of it per se, but moving through and being able to reconnect with his family. And then We Best Love, the grief with the whole relationship breakdown and like just completely being cut off from like not knowing what the hell happened, and then just this not knowing, and then reconnecting again and processing like all of these, I guess, moments of grief that these characters have had, and then the way that they shape their characters in so many different ways is so interesting. And I feel like Taiwanese BLs are like the only ones that do it like this. I love it. I don't have anything else to say except like I find it so fascinating, and I don't understand it. Like how I can't no. How am I trying to say this? Because like I don't understand is not the right terminology I want to use, but like I don't understand how all of these like very similar themes of grief then create all these very different characters and very different reactions to these situations of grief, aspects of grief.
I mean, I think it's very reflective of how grief works in people. I mean, you know, you see a lot of those, they're not memes, they're like those inspirational, you know, photos about like grief is like this, and then you're like this, and then you're going backwards, and like that kind of thing. And like, you know, it's corny, but like it's kind of true. And I think, you know, having different kinds of grief manifest very differently and influence characters very differently is very true to reality. I mean, I've talked about before, like my dad died 5 years ago, and like, you know, processing that grief has been very different for me than it has been for my younger sibling and my older brother and my mom. And so like, you know, we all had this similar sort of grief happen to us, but it's manifested completely differently because we all had different relationships with this person. And, you know, I think that's in the Taiwanese BLs, you know, grief from a relationship breakdown, or grief from the loss of a partner, or grief from being kicked out or losing your family in a way because they kicked you out. All these different forms of grief, you know, everyone manifests through, not manifests, that manifests differently in everyone and all of these different characters. And so I think, you know, something as the singular term grief creating so many different stories and so many different characters is like super true reality.
Did you guys watch Unknown?
I haven't yet.
No.
It's on my list. No spoilers. No spoilers.
No spoilers. No spoilers.
I really want to watch it.
But
Taiwanese BLs, you're not allowed to spoil for me.
Yeah. No.
Everything else I don't care.
This is, well, it's not like a spoiler. I'm just like saying that his grief and trauma from when he was a kid made him to sort of get into this whole where he had to take care of everyone.
Yeah, becoming the caretaker.
Yeah, which was really interesting to watch.
Kind of overcompensating. I mean, I didn't like. Was it like very a parent much. Or just like? So he felt like he had to take the place of a parent, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Grief is one of those things that we're all going to have to deal with at some point. At some point, you know, some sooner than others. And it comes out in many different ways. Like you guys had mentioned, you know, relationship, death, friendships. At some point, we will all have to deal with it. And the good thing about the, you know, as much as I curse at Taiwan for all of their the pain,
the emotional
pain, yes, emotional pain throwing in my face. Madsi, oh my god, Make Our
I
Days
know,
Count.
it's the
During the subathon, I watched that, and
Oh, it's fresh.
I had to watch it. I literally walked out of this room and just cried for like 10
Yes.
minutes, and then came back, and
I
then cried some
literally
more on camera.
Yeah. I was crying on and off for a month when I first
Yeah.
Just
watched
think
it.
about
It
it.
was like,
Yeah.
No, I
oh, it
refused
really
to
got
watch
to
the last
me.
episode, so I
No,
came
I
in
love
5
it.
minutes
You gotta
in and
watch
I'm just,
it. You gotta
nope,
have the
I'm
whole
not doing
thing.
this. We're not doing this.
It's a little cathartic sometimes, though.
Mm.
Sometimes I feel like in our society, we tend to bottle things up a little bit, and
Mhm.
and that glass continues to fill up, whether we want to release it or not. It's going to come out in some ways, and sometimes a healthy way is just watch a series that's going to make you cry your eyes out.
Yeah,
Yep.
100%.
Yes.
I'm like,
Get-
I've talked about before, this is just Alexa airing her daddy issues time, but like, I didn't have a good relationship with my dad, but like when I see that stuff in dramas, like it's still gonna make you cry, and that is cathartic. And I feel like that helps in a way with like processing that what you went through watching the show and like connecting with those characters in the show, but also if it connects to something in your real life. And so like I feel like it sucks, it hurts, like it was very painful to watch the last 5 minutes of Make Our Days Count. And sorry, my mom just texted me, I got distracted. It was painful to watch the last like episode and a half of Make Our Days Count, but like Shawn said, like you get that catharsis out of it, and all the crying kind of, I think, gives you the closure you needed to, I think, Make Our Days Count specifically. Like, of course, even between Pixie and Heather, you can see that it's very polarizing. Like, some people hate it very, very seriously because of what it did to them, and some people are like, oh, I hated this, but it's the best thing that ever happened to me, kind of hate it. And so yeah, I think I totally lost where I was trying to finish off that point. But yes, catharsis, letting yourself cry and feel things, I think is a great way to get closure on a show and on the characters that you connected with. And yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I
that
think even if
point
you
is-
haven't experienced, sorry, go ahead, Kayla.
No, you go ahead.
I think also if you haven't experienced something like that yet, it gives you a reference point at some point that, we all know we're going to go through it. I think that it gives you that ability to kind of see maybe how to deal with it, or how somebody else has dealt with it, or sometimes I think back to parenting, which I'm not a parent, but you learn sometimes how not to go through something, or how to do something maybe a little bit better than this other individual. And I think sometimes, even if you haven't been through it, or even if there's no catharsis in that, you can at least maybe learn a little bit from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Kayla, were you gonna
Sorry,
say
I cut
something?
you off, Kayla.
I was just gonna say that. What was I gonna say? I was gonna say that the catharsis point is very interesting, because I feel like a lot of the shows that I consider comfort shows are very
depressing.
sad and
Yeah.
go very
Yep.
heavy on
Yep.
the mental
Yep.
health issues.
Yep. I love watching shit that
That's
makes
all.
me cry because it's cathartic in a way.
Yep.
And that goes to why group therapy is so
We're crying
helpful
together.
for people. You learn that there's somebody else kind of going through it with you, and you're not alone in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is kind of like a tangent, but I feel like that kind of ties into like reactions too, like Shawn and Kayla both being people that do reactions. Like I remember watching Kayla cry, watching I Feel You Linger in the Air, and crying again watching Kayla cry, watching I Feel You Linger in the Air. Like it's just like you're feeling those feelings with the person, and you're getting catharsis out of knowing that someone else also went through the same emotions that you did during that show or time period or whatever it was. So yeah, 100%.
Kind of going off on your tangent, I think reactions in general, we can only experience something for the first time once.
Yeah.
And being able to kind of go through that with somebody else is also pretty cool. It's the only other kind of experiencing it once that you can kind of go through again.
Absolutely. All right.
not to try and
I was
keep
gonna say,
reactors around or
do you want me
anything.
to?
Hey, we love
I This is a great segue, Alexa.
Oh,
Great segue into the next topic,
yeah,
the next
because
country.
the next country we had to talk about was the Philippines. And obviously the Philippines BL boom was pretty short-lived, which is sad, but I think one of the most interesting things that we got out of the Filipino BL was grief, specifically in relation to COVID. And other BLs since then have kind of touched on COVID and integrated them into their shows, like kind of in passing. But I think the Philippines making BLs actively in the pandemic and making that the focal point of so many of their shows, thinking of Game Boys, they touch specifically on grief and the loss of a parent to COVID and the loss of your plans that you had for this period of your life, and the loss of literally just the ability to go outside and exist as a human in society. And that is all different forms of grief that we all collectively experience during that period of time, which feels like forever ago, but also technically hasn't ended. So yeah, I think that was a really interesting form of grief that no one else really did the way that the Philippines did, and I think which is what made Filipino BL stick out so much while they were really going off in 2020 and 2021, because we were all very much relating to them and getting that feeling of catharsis watching these characters like experience the pandemic the same way that we did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, Game
No
Boys
notes.
for me helped me through my mental health during the pandemic. Just seeing that life goes on, even though there are restrictions, even though we're stuck at home, like love still exists, kind of thing. Like, I don't know. I know that while watching it during the pandemic, like it really got me through everything, and it really meant a lot. I think it made much more impact on me that I watched it then than if I watched it later now or something, like, because I was going through it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I don't know. I didn't have like a lot of specific examples for this one, but I just think like the general feelings that they evoked during that time period were like very specific. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
Not a pandemic one, but there's also the theme of grief in The Day I Loved You. Around like chronic illness and loss. With that, just wanted to throw that one out there because that and Game Boys are really the only two that I can think of that I feel went very hard on the idea of mental health.
Yeah, and
There's
it's like
also
The Day I Loved You. Oh, go ahead, Heather.
No, I'm going to go completely off The Day I Loved You. So please finish the comment. Please finish the thought.
I was just gonna say, I feel like it flew very under the radar for something that I feel like was very well received for the people that watched it, for capturing those themes of like chronic illness and the grief that comes with that, and just in general being a good story. So yeah, that's all.
I was just going to say, this isn't grief per se, but the struggles, so in Gaia Sepulchra, and the struggles of coming out, being accepted, what people think, the anxiety that brings, and how that then manifests as just completely withdrawing yourself from the world, but then allowing yourself, then like that element in Gaia Sepulchra where allowing yourself to just be, and like what that means and how that can affect you as a person, like that. I feel like that series really showed that struggle, that acceptance, what that can mean for you really well. And I remember that was a show that like really affected me as I was watching it. Because just like really relating with the characters and just going through like confusion and like remembering confusion and how it really affected me at the time, and like trying to piece things together, and just like, oh, I think that if we're kind of like, I guess as we're talking through this, we're like, good depictions, bad depictions, like if we're putting them in boxes, like really, like, yeah, I feel like that was a good depiction because of just how it affected me. And like when watching it back as well, it's not like it was a gloss over it. It's just a thing that happens. You just accept it. It's like, it does happen. We move through, we process, certain things aren't healthy. Again, using these like slapping stickers on, putting things in boxes, sweeping generalizations. But yeah, I think that Guy Sepulchra had they just did it really well. And I think this whole idea of like this anxiety, so we haven't even touched on anxiety and like how that's shown in a lot of these characters, and the way that people, I guess, react to certain things. I think, yeah, GSP did it so well.
I think GSP and Game Boys showed anxiety pretty well, especially in terms of coming out.
True.
I mean, it was such a Game Boys was the beginning for me, so it's always like a very big a very big series in my coming to BL moments.
Coming home
to the BL genre. There's so much depicted in such a I don't know. I don't even remember how long it is. How long is it anymore? It was there were so many things. Yes, we had the pandemic, but kind of going back to your point though, there is so much anxiety. If you've ever had to come out or just tell somebody something difficult, whatever that might be, there's so much anxiety about what could be. And there's almost, to some extent, a potential pre-grief where you're just thinking about, what if this person does reject me? How would I deal with this? And so there's almost like this kind of what I said, pre-grief, in that you're just trying to think of how would you process this? How would you deal with this? Which then, of course, ties into that anxiety. And I agree. I think Gaia does such a great job of. It's nice in books where you can actually see the internal monologue, but I think if you have a good actor, it can be portrayed on their faces and in different actions. And I think Gaia Sepulchra does a very good job of that. I think Game Boys does a pretty good job of that as well, but I think Game Boys maybe showcases the emotionality maybe a little bit more in a broader sense. I do miss those Filipino BLs though. Like that was such a good moment in BL history.
And there's definitely been one or two that have come out that have hit, but in general, their boom was very short-lived.
2020 to 2021. It was like,
that's so short. Oh my god.
Well, we'll have season 3 soon, so
yeah, Game Boys, New York, NYC, whatever that means. Do I need to fly to New York for something? I don't know. I'll go if I have to.
Why is it always New York? Why not Chicago? Seriously.
Why not Norway?
Okay, well.
I wonder.
Nothing happens here.
I'll take it. Well, yeah. Like, the BL boys come to Australia, but they don't do anything except holiday. I want content, guys. Yeah, that's true.
DramaLlama is gonna try and change that all, but that's it.
Bring them everywhere. Spoiler.
I'll be your Australian correspondent.
Do it.
I don't know.
I'm here for that.
I'll be the Norwegian one, but no one wants to go there.
European.
I want to go there.
Yay!
Oceanic, European.
You got it. Alrighty. So, of course, the fifth and final country, which I feel like we get the most examples from Thailand, just because the most BLs have come out of Thailand. But of course, there are quite a few different examples of different mental health, psychological issues that we see across all different types of BL. So I think I kind of had mentioned this earlier in general, but I think a lot of the times, like PTSD is one that we see a lot show up in Thai BL. So like the two examples that we had here in relation to PTSD, at least, were actually three. So like bed friend shows PTSD from parental abuse and trauma. Love in the Air shows PTSD from relationship abuse and trauma. Until we meet again, past life PTSD and trauma. So I think, kind of going back to that point, that a lot of these BL boys have really, really difficult childhoods, and have gone through a lot of things in their childhood that I think kind of influence their characters in the present. But I think, something like Bed Friend or Love in the Air and even Until We Meet Again are shows that very explicitly make that trauma a part of the story and the characters' growth throughout the show. And so I felt like those were three that were really worth mentioning in that realm. And I think in general, I know Kayla really, really connected with Bedfriend a lot. And the way that that story was done with and his, his trauma kind of resulting in him being this person who only wants to have bed friends, and how he kind of, lost my wording here. How he kind of grew and worked through his trauma throughout the show with his relationship with King, and I think Love in the Air with Sky and Prapai. That was kind of the same situation, not entirely the same, but kind of working through the trauma that Sky had been through with Prapai, and just having someone there who would actually treat him like a decent, like an actual human being, and was good to him, and how that I guess opened his eyes to what life can be beyond what he has been through type situation. So yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, Kayla, do you want to give your thoughts on Bedfriend?
I feel like I have way too much. But I can do it again. I mean, this series I feel like is a speed run in just showcasing emotional, mental trauma that is done to a character through pretty much every form of abuse you can think of, and how it affects the way that the main character, it affects everything in his life, like his interactions with others, not trusting anyone, not wanting to get close with anyone, kind of like trying to throw himself into work because that's distracting him from all of his sadness. I personally feel that it's very, very underrated in the way that it depicts all of these things. And it's always been one of those series where I feel like people would really understand it for what it is and give it a chance, instead of just like thinking that it's some like NSFW like series. But truly, I think it is the best BL I've ever seen depict mental illness, and just like the repercussions of that, what it does to you, and how you can work through it depending on just like everyone's individual reaction to it.
I agree 100%. Yeah, I mean, even when I was watching it, there was only like one moment, and it was towards the end, where I was kind of like, I didn't really like those wording, but it could have been translation too. But other than that, like, I was sitting there, I'm like, you guys are giving nothing for me to actually complain about here. You guys are showcasing how to communicate about this, how it impacts potentially your partner, and how to move through that together even. And that's important, because if you're gonna get into, whether even if it is like a friends with benefits kind of deal, you're still going to have to understand this thing with this person and try to move through it with them in whatever capacity that might be for the two of you and whatever, you know, you come up with. But yeah, 100% agree with you, Kayla.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Love in the Air. I know for Lovecast when we did our review of it, we didn't enjoy that one as much, the Sky and Papaya storyline as much as Payu in Rain. But I think speaking to Shawn's point of like having a partner try to work through how your trauma influences the way you approach your romantic, sexual, friendship relationships. I do think Papai was someone who was also a pretty good example of trying to understand what Sky went through and how it influenced the way he approached their relationship and the relationship throughout the show. So, you know, I think maybe not to the extent that Bedfriend did, but I think with Papai, I think he is also kind of a similar character where he was a partner who's trying to walk through this with his partner as opposed to just, I don't know what the opposed to, trying to fix him, I guess.
The biggest difference I see with Bed Friends and Love in the Air is that Bed Friend had a really good way of showing boundaries, and Papai does not know the words boundaries.
He did overstep a lot.
A lot, which really made that last part, like their story, not work for me at all. I did not like it, but I loved Bed Friend. So I think like even though the premise is similar, I think it's kind of like an example of how to do it and how not to do it.
I do see it. Yeah, I was gonna say I do see both points because like in the scheme of things, Papai did want to help. In a way, it was just the way he went about it was vastly different to how King, I guess, helped and supported his partner. And so when you're putting them when you're comparing the two, and you're looking at like boundaries being put in place, boundaries being overstepped, like yes, they are definitely quite different. But I do think like, to everyone's point, because everyone's touched on it, like the being there and communicating and wanting to help and being open to communicating and helping and working with the person who's been through and going through PTSD. Both shows showed that, and there are shows that have done that even worse in ways.
That's true. Yeah.
So like on the scale, I'm like trying to make it a bit better. On the scale of like what's absolutely horrible and like a decent depiction, Bedfriend definitely highest. And then like Sky and Papai definitely had their moments. But I do think that Papai was a bit of an overstepper. But in saying that, the entirety of Love in the Air was very much about overstepping boundaries. Like the entirety of it, and like not even just overstepping, like pushing boundaries, seeing how far we can push things. And
I think that's a general theme of MAME. So yeah, pushing things.
True. And like
I always have a lot to say about these series and all of that, so I'm not going to say any of it at this moment.
No, dude. Even if you completely disagree with everything we're saying, like, yeah.
Just go.
Oh, we both just literally spoke at the exact same time. You go, Pixie, then I'll go.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, everyone can just go and watch Synergy video about, like, I remember your first video I watched was talking about MAME and all of that. So.
And then I was saying, like, please give us your opinions. And I was going to say, even if you completely disagree with us.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I completely disagree with you or not. I haven't seen anything beyond. I think my biggest issue is, and this is where I probably disagree with most, in that I definitely don't hate the idea of showing SA and these scenarios happening. I think that there is a way to do it that is healing for a lot of people. I particularly don't like, to put it nicely, how it is written a lot of times in these series.
Yep.
It's I mean, there are parts of me as the psychologist, the sexual victimization researcher, etc., you know, but there's also as an LGBTQ person that I just really have a problem with it. Because it's the same, it feels like the same thing over and over again, where it's some LGBTQ identifying person essays this other not necessarily identifying person, and here we are with the same old
Oh my
you
gosh.
know,
That being said,
vilifying
Tarn
us.
Type was my first BL, like Thai BL.
That's crazy.
That's the only series I've ever walked out on.
Oh my gosh. You know what? This Shawn, this reminds me of when we reacted to the warp effect.
Yes.
And we were both, because me and Shawn really align on this point, is like how they will it really is how they'll write the sexual abuse in some of these shows. It reminds me of that and like all of the issues that we had with that show.
Yeah. It's the same. I mean, it's the same thing that people have been using against LGBTQ people for ever. You know, they're going to you know, take the straight people and they're gonna do naughty sexual things to them and turn them, you know, against their will. It's just it's old. It's not helpful.
I mean, this reminds me of a conversation I had with a friend today, because she was telling me a story about her partner's friend group, and how one of the guys, he doesn't really care what genders anyone is, and they were going to go on a trip, and he was going to have a big room that would have more room for other people, but some of the guys in the group wouldn't want to share room with him because they were uncomfortable with him not caring who he sleeps with. Now he's like, oh dude, how are we in that mindset in 2024? I told her, like, if they said that in front of me, I would smack them. Like,
For real.
It is so stupid. But like, the fact that people still think that is crazy to me.
I personally just think that they are gay and they just are trying to hide it.
That's usually, like, that was my...
If you're gonna like it that much, you're already a little gay.
Yeah.
Just come on over.
Why not? Jump right in.
Dude.
But yeah.
I think that there is something to be said about, like I said earlier, there is something to be said about writing and how, like, the art therapy exists for a reason, you know, writing therapy, all of the, like, there's a reason why we use journaling and all this kind of stuff. And I think that there are very helpful ways to write about it and to present these stories, like Bed Friend. And then there are some potentially harming ways that this can be shown. And I think that's
this is a very, my next point jumping on this is going to be very, like, there are some people who love it and some people who hate it. This is very polarizing. But that brings me to Kin Porsche and specifically Vegas Pete and how damaging I personally think some of their storyline is and can be if people are just watching it and taking it as gospel. That this is, like, because it was like, so okay, so when their storyline happened, and then everyone's like, it's BDSM, you don't understand BDSM if you, and I'm like,
It's not, it's really not.
Dude,
Yeah,
you know
like,
what
the
BDSM
people
is?
who, yeah, and like the people who take things as gospel from fiction and don't look further into it, and like, yes, things can be inspired by things, but it doesn't mean that that is it. And like this whole idea of we were talking about like romanticizing trauma. There's this level of romanticizing sexual trauma and sexual assault and the
I mean, as a
not even really
from
fine line.
from my
But,
point of view,
yeah.
like I didn't mind the storyline. I actually liked the plot and everything, but I recognize that that's not reality, and I see it as pure fiction and nothing else. But there is something to say for, especially when you have TV shows where it's harder for people to separate fiction from reality. It's yeah.
Yeah.
That
I
also
guess that's
brings in the question of what responsibility does the media have to depict things in an appropriate way? Like, is it all on them? Is it partly on the viewer to kind of know right from wrong? It's very interesting, and a lot of that comes to me when I think of Kin Porsche, because I'm like, you can't control how people like react to a creative work and what they take from it. Like everyone is going to take something differently and think differently about it, but it does get to a point sometimes where I'm like, this might be really really harmful to be showing on TV. But yeah, that's another line that I'm like, it's really difficult sometimes to pinpoint.
Yeah, I remember always they were talking about when 13 Reasons Why came out, and they were talking about the explicit that scene and how they shouldn't show it because it was glorifying it, and it ended like the statistics were showing that it went up afterwards. So like there's some evidence that like this has real effect on people. But at the same time, who are the people watching that, and what is the effect of it? Like the Vegas Pete, what is the actual effect of it for people watching it? What is the damage? Like, I'm genuinely asking, not trying to.
Okay, yeah. Well, yeah, I would think that like there's the potential to think that, I guess, like the bound. So this kind of comes back to crossing boundaries and consent, and what is consent, what isn't consent, how far can you push consent, should you push consent, all that sort of stuff. And if you've got people watching a series or a storyline where the consent's just completely taken away from someone in a sexual encounter, and it's then seen as this big romantic thing. If you've got people who are like under 25 because your brain being developed and your formative years, if you've got people like in that period of their life, formative life, where they're discovering relationships, discovering their interactions with other people that they are romantically interested in, sexually interested in, if they're seeing these depictions, this is potential again. If they're potentially seeing these like this depiction of a risque relationship, and it's seen as this big romantic thing, or it's seen as this thing happened, it was fucking horrible, but this like this love comes out of it. What does that mean to them, and how they're going to form their relationships and excuse certain behavior that happens to them, or allow certain behavior for them to do to other people if they don't have another way to work through that, another way to see there are other options, just this understanding of splitting something out of fiction and putting it into everyday. And I know that it's all like formative years, young people, youth. I'm not trying to go like the youth are in danger. That's not where I'm going. I'm more just like I'm more just like thinking, if you if you're told one thing all the time, if you're always seeing something, if you're always shown something in media, you're not given the tools to unpack that, discuss that, figure out what that means for you, what that means for you in society, what that means for others around you. You're just going to kind of go with what you're told. And that can have disastrous effects, not just in like sexuality, relationships, but just in general. Like we've seen people growing up being told one thing and then like how that affects them and their like how they then view the world and how they try to shape the world, shape themselves in the world.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
do-
kind of
I do think like if we're taking Vegas Pete as an example, I think their story to me is sort of in the extreme that it doesn't like lend to plausibility, but shows like History 4, where the casual sexual assault while drunk happened without any like consequences, and the comment about, oh, if I was a girl it would be sexual assault. Like small things like that, I find a lot more damaging than a show that it takes it a little more to the extreme. But
true, except you're a 30 plus woman
yeah,
who has a fully formed brain, who has been through 30 plus years of figuring things out, understanding things, knowing what your place is in the world. You've done your research, you think through things fully.
True.
If a 18-year-old person is watching these things all the time and having this understanding of, oh, lines can be blurred. It's not a hard line, it's a blurred line.
Yeah.
I would make the argument that, listen, as much as we want to say 18-year-olds, let's be real. There are going to be younger people that watch this too.
Yeah.
Maybe
Absolutely,
individuals who are just discovering their own sexuality. And I'm not saying that like we can do our best to try and limit who views these kinds of things, but it's one thing for like, yes, 18-year-old kids still have that I don't know, that thought, but seeing a 13-year-old, knowing myself at 13-year-old as a 13-year-old trying to figure this stuff out, seeing that, you know, I do worry about it. I'm not saying ultimately it all comes down to communication. We all have to have conversations. We all have to be talking about this stuff. And I think younger generations in general are having those conversations, which is a great thing. But you know, we are creatures of the gray, as I like to say. Everything is gray to us. You know, there are some positive, some negative, some black, some white. It is just, we have to communicate open and honestly with each other and try to figure this out together, because I don't know that there's rarely ever just 100% the right answer.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. I mean, my thoughts were thinking, you know, we were talking specifically about Vegas Pete, but like Kim Porsche in general is I mean, there's a scene between Ken and Porsche where Porsche is drugged up and they have sex, and he very clearly feels not good about it the next day and has a very negative reaction to it. The other relationship in a show is between, you know, Porsche, who is 17, and Kim, who I don't really know if they ever said how old his age was, but that one gets back into like the
definitely in his 20s.
Yeah, an adult man. And that one goes back into like the idolization, because, you know, it's a singer and his fan, and there's a lot of different, you know, relationship dynamics going on there. So like Kim Porsche in general is just gray relationships, and I feel like this show is one where people have argued until they were blue in the face about whether it is good or bad, and if we should be watching it, if it should exist and if it shouldn't. And I don't think we're gonna ever find an answer to that, because everyone, like the five of us sitting here, all have very different feelings about all of the relationships in Kim Porsche, I'm sure. And so I mean, I think it's important to facilitate discussion around it, which is like what Shawn was saying. Like, we need to have these conversations. If you're gonna show a relationship like Vegas Pete or something like what happened between Ken and Porsche, you know, I think it's important to create discussion around it and not just take it at face value, which I think is where we were coming from
That's
and
my
bringing that
point.
point up is
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you know, if people are just taking it at face value, then yes, I think there is
Yeah.
some issue that can arise from that. But if you're, you know, you're sitting here having a discussion like what we're having now and like what plenty of other people have had around Kin Porsche, and I think, you know, you're able to take something out of it beyond just what's presented to you on the screen, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that wraps up my point, or what
Yeah.
I was trying to get at was,
Mhm.
yeah, the conversation, have the conversation,
Mhm,
think it
mhm,
out.
mhm,
Don't
mhm.
just take everything at face value. But that's
Yeah.
just in general.
Exactly.
In life, don't take everything at face value.
Yeah.
Also,
100%.
since it's on our like page here, can I just say that Dinosaur Love was horrible?
Okay, I
I hate it.
just put that in as we were talking, specifically because I only watched 3 episodes and I
We-
tapped out when trigger warning, the suicide attempt for attention, like,
See, I only watched
Sorry,
the 2
that was shock
episodes that we
value.
watched
That
in
was-
Thailand. And I
that
clocked
wasn't
out.
even there for a reason. That was
Yeah.
literally there to shock and create
Yeah.
this shock for the no. I
Mm.
have very
That's
strong
wild.
tap out. No, 100% not happening.
Yeah.
No.
It was definitely not the way to do toxic,
Yeah.
because it wasn't framed as toxic. Like their relationship, even though like it's the most toxic shit I've ever seen, and it wasn't framed that way at all.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
It's like so
Yeah, I
cutesy while he's being gaslit.
Yeah,
Yeah,
remember
right?
that?
So cutesy
That's-
while he's being freaking assaulted by his boyfriend. So cutesy while he's
Real.
stopping this person from bleeding out. Like, oh my god.
Mm.
Mm,
Sorry,
I don't
no.
know.
I feel very
Never thought so.
passionately about no.
We
mean,
watched
it
2
would have-
episodes in
it-
Thailand, and I was like, nope.
It would probably
I
have
watched
been
one more and said-
okay received if this was like 2018 and 2019. People would probably not like think about it. But the fact that it was released like was last year is wild.
Yeah. I don't know.
Growth.
What I was gonna say is the one good thing about Kin Porsche is that they did have the conversation after the fact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that
Kin
was
and
pretty
Porsche.
impressive to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
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 An
Yeah.
apology, acknowledgement of,
Yeah.
I should not have done that with you as much as you wanted to do it in the moment. I think that was a really good
That was
conversation
important.
that
That
came
was
out of
important.
that. I agree.
I agree.
Mhm.
Okay.
I feel like it always just comes back to communicate.
Conversations,
Just
having
communicate. Just
I
talk.
Imagine that.
Empathize.
And I
Talk.
think-
Work it out.
that is like when you come back to a lot of these BLs that we might categorize as bad depictions of mental health or certain types of relationships. I think it comes back to like what Shawn was saying about the writing and what Kayla was saying about the writing is that they don't
Yeah.
write anything into the story that allows people to communicate about it as the characters or create any
Yeah.
conversation as the audience watching it. So like when you have these moments like the conversation in Kin Porsche where, you know, Kin acknowledges that he should not have said yes to having sex with Porsche while he was under the influence after he had been drugged. You know, it's creating a space where, you know, you can still have these conversations about whether or not that's something that should be shown, but showing the characters acknowledging it and having a conversation about it does a lot more than just having it there and writing past it, which I think is what a lot of the shows that people tend to take issue with or see as bad depictions is what they do. They just kind of write over it and don't really allow anyone to do anything with it beyond the surface level of what just happened to these characters or what these characters just did. So yeah.
Mhm.
We've been talking for a while. I did have Only Friends on the list because I think that is a show that had touched on addiction, which I don't think, I mean,
Yeah.
we have seen a lot in BL, at least not explicitly, you know, acknowledging as addiction. And I guess we were talking about therapy scenes in BL. That is a BL that had that therapy breakthrough scene with Ray. And I think we were talking about conversations. I think Ray was a very, very polarizing character in Only Friends. And to be honest, I don't think, I know people had, there was criticisms to be had of OnlyFriends. I will say I don't think Ray's writing was where the polarization around his character came from. I think the fandom discourse throughout OnlyFriends was something for the history books. And I don't know if I mean
It was
in a
that you
good
had to
way.
be there moment.
Yeah.
You had to be there.
And I think a lot of what came, I mean, we've had a lot of discussions about, was Ray a bad person? Did Ray deserve the things that happened to him? Should Ray have treated his friends this way? I think the way his character was written, you know, didn't necessarily, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. I don't know if what I'm trying to say is making sense. I think Ray was a polarizing character because the fandom made him a polarizing character, if that makes sense. Because there was a lot of fandom discussion around pairings in the show and wanting their pairing to be received a certain type of way, shown a certain type of way, etc., etc. And so I think there came a lot of fandom discourse out of that, which led to, in some cases, I think, really demonizing Ray's addiction by the fans. I mean, there were discussions to be had about when Ray was very much brutalized by the police, people saying he deserved for that to happen to him. And so, you know, I think, not that he was a straightforward character, because I think he was a very complex character and there was a lot going on there, but I think he wasn't necessarily polarizing in the sense that he was written that way, but in the sense that the fandom made him that way. I don't know if that makes sense.
I personally think like it has to do with addiction in itself.
Yeah.
The stigma of addiction.
It is still very stigmatized,
and it's not seen as a disease, it's seen as something you just do because like you're treating people bad because you're an addict. Like Ray as a character was an addict in every sense of his being. Like he was addicted to everything. It's just not drugs, it's not only drugs, it's not only alcohol. It's people, it's a way of living. Like he gets addicted to sand, he gets addicted to everything like he touches basically. And I think it's really like, as a person who has like a lot of family that deals with addiction, it's kind of rampant among my family. Like we know that we need to stay away from things that can trigger addiction. I recognized a lot in Ray as a character, and I think they did a really good job in depicting it and depicting how it affects him and it affects the people around him, because like the blame can be put everywhere, but at the end of the day, like addiction is a disease and needs to be treated that way. But I think that's one of the big things with addiction, and I think that is something that was shown with Ray through his character, is that people tend to think it's a choice. And there was a lot of times where Ray's friends were like asking him why he doesn't just stop, essentially. You know, whether it's alcohol or some of the other stuff that he is going through. And yeah, I guess what I was trying to say is that, like, I think the writing did the justice in depicting the complexity of being friends with, being in a relationship with someone who has addiction in some sense of the word. But I don't know if the audience perceived it. And we go back to that conversation of like, you can't make the audience perceive something the way you want it to be perceived, I guess. And so, I guess there's kind of a whole bunch of stuff jumbled up there in the way Ray was perceived, the way he was written, et cetera, et cetera. The good thing is that it created a lot of talk. Like it opened up a conversation, which is what we want from situations like this, especially about something that people aren't really educated about. Like a lot of people probably learned a lot from the discourse and stuff online. So
as long as they were a part of it, and maybe
that's true.
Not some of it not good, some of it not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to worry about some of the conversations online. You know, some of the loudest voices are often the ones that
So wrong.
know the least. Unfortunately.
Mm.
Yeah, I really liked Ray. I mean, yes, I didn't like Ray, but
Yeah.
but at the
Yeah.
same time, I
Yeah.
loved his character and the way that it was written, the
Exactly.
complexity.
Yeah.
I like the fact that we actually saw him going into therapy. I loved the camera work whenever we were in therapy. You know, I really enjoyed that storyline. I think that they're only friends. I didn't expect that in Only Friends, honestly,
Yeah.
because I was like, I was in this for the mess. Okay, I was here for the
Yeah.
mess. And
I think we
we
all
got a
went out
little
for
bit
the
of sugar
mess.
in that
Got
too.
Now
some
we're
of that.
crying over an
Yeah.
addiction breakthrough.
Yeah.
Did I
Yeah.
sign up for this? But yeah, no,
Definitely.
I just thought, you know, addiction it's not easy to portray for all the reasons I feel like we have discussed in terms of Ray. So it was unexpected with Only Friends, and I'm glad that we have Ray as a character to kind of reflect on something that we have definitely not seen that often in BL and Asian dramas as a whole, I think, honestly. So
Yeah.
all right, time to wrap it up. We have a few final questions to kind of tie everything together before we say goodbye. So what are, I guess, some of the pitfalls of addressing mental health issues in romantic narratives? I feel like one that has kind of been an overarching theme of our discussion is I feel like they often aren't given the detail or attention that they need to, I don't want to say make them worthwhile depicting, but I think, you know, we get depictions that are very shallow, and it's almost like I almost wish you hadn't included this because I feel like it doesn't do justice to what you want to say with this character or what you're trying to do with adding this to part of the character's narrative.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it's used as a prop and
Yeah,
not
that's
part of the plot.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like sometimes it's used as like a little story point just to like quickly explain
Add
something,
the story.
but it's not actually explaining anything. It's just used as like putting on a hat.
Yeah, it's like, oh,
And to explain
this will
that this
justify
like-
this, but does it?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, no, because you're also coming at it from, you're just using this as a, yeah, as like a prop, as a oh my god, my brain was working, now it's not working. What am I trying to say? Like using it as, oh, not even like shock value at times. Like, oh, I need to explain why this character is so arrogant in what they're doing, or like I need to explain why this character doesn't want to be in a relationship with this person. Oh, they have sexual trauma. And you're like, sorry, what? What happened?
Yeah.
Why? Why?
Yeah,
Like, why
I
is
read
that your first point?
Yeah, I read somewhere that if you're gonna write a story and put something in there, the first question is why.
Yeah, why are
Why?
you? Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
don't have the why, it shouldn't be in the story.
Yeah. Or like, why is this person so obsessed with this other person? Do you just want to tell a story about stalking? Do you want to tell a story about someone being so in love with someone else that they will do pretty much anything? Are you trying to tell an obsession story? Are you trying to tell are you trying to come at it from, I guess, like a mental health direction? Are you just putting this in to explain the obsession but without actually explaining, like, why are you using these issues in these romantic stories
Especially
without
when
actually,
you
like,
haven't researched it and know nothing about it.
yeah, like, why are you, it's shock, like, it just keeps coming back to shock value. Like, why are you using certain issues for shock value?
Yeah.
Like, what's the point? Why?
Yep.
Does that actually further your point, or is that actually harming people or your point or the story itself?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the other point that I had written down in terms of like the pitfalls of addressing are, and this is across all media, I feel like there is a strong conflation of like mental health, people with mental health issues being the bad guy. So maybe not as much when we're, you know, discussing main characters in BL, but I think a lot of the times if you have someone who is a villain, and it kind of comes back to this like, oh, we'll just use this as an excuse to justify their actions. Like, you know, this person did that because he has PTSD. That's why he was so horrible to this person in the show. Or this person did this because she is schizophrenic or something like that. And so I think that's very, very dangerous. Heather, I can see you want to say something.
I was gonna say
please.
that. Sorry, I really don't mean to cut you off, but that 100% reminds me of the villain in Tantai.
Yeah, what's his
and
name?
All
Yeah,
of
that's
the
what I was thinking of too.
that he did, and then
yeah, something like that.
yeah, and then it was just like, and like he literally set up so much horrible fucking shit. And it was all explained away because he's mentally ill.
That's literally like,
and
these people will commit literal crimes, and they'll be like, it's
literal
because he
crimes,
was
ruin
depressed.
people's
and I'm
lives.
Like, huh?
There were no consequences for him at all either. Like,
and it's like,
but like it was all explained away because he's mentally ill.
Exactly.
And like I'm putting the quotation marks around because I'm pretty sure they literally used that. Mentally ill wasn't explained, just that.
Yeah, the dangers of being like explaining something away as mental illness and like not giving anyone any real consequences because you're just gonna say they were mentally ill instead. Like the demonization of mental illness, especially when you get into the less like quirky mental, like psychological issues, when you're getting into things like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia and the things that people can't, you know, write off as, I'm having a little bit of a depression, you know. Those tend to be the ones that like they'll use to justify the villain, and it gets very, very dangerous when you start doing that. And I think I don't see things like that mentioned as much in BL, but in media in general. And like you said, like Long is a great example of that being one time where it did happen, where they quite literally had a man committing literal crimes and said it was because he was mentally ill. And I'm like, we can't do that anymore. Like we should never have been doing that, but like we can't be doing it anymore. Like, yeah, it's.
I never made it that far into Tarn.
For the best.
That made me so angry.
I feel like specifically for MAME, there's a lot of examples of exactly that route, and mental health being used as just something to explain or further the plot.
It's just lazy writing.
Yeah, I agree.
It is.
It's lazy writing.
Completely.
And it's the same. That's my biggest issue in general with that person.
I wonder if that kind of comes back to the point. I wonder if that kind of comes back to the point that we're making about watching certain things in your formative years, because a lot of these BLs are actually written when people were teenagers.
Yeah.
And then they've become these shows, and it's like this whole circle that like keeps perpetuating this idea of mental health and these relationships and what's healthy and what isn't healthy. Like I wonder if that's just the circle continuing to roll, to extend the metaphor.
Yeah. I mean, I do think, a lot of these a lot of the novels that these shows were written on were written by like 16, 17, 18-year-old writers who were writing them like to share with their friends, essentially, like when we talked about with Bam Bam, like the origins of Thai BL, and that they would just share them with each other. And then I think that's when you kind of get into discussion of what responsibility do productions have to transform, update, and rewrite media to be depicted on screen in a way that is fitting for the time period, the on-screen audience, and just the content of the show in general, which we've discussed a lot, and I feel like that's a whole another discussion in and of itself again. But there's a lot. It is kind of like a circle of like when this was written, how it was adapted,
Mhm.
etc., etc. Yeah.
I think a lot of the more recent shows that are good because they have taken the time to really adapt the writing for the
Or it's a
screen.
new script that has a writer's room of adults writing
Yeah.
it.
But some novels just can't even be made into a script. Like I am,
Yeah, some of them should not
actually,
be.
like, even though I hated it
Just
when
stay
it
as like
I
fiction,
hated
written
when they
fiction.
told us there weren't going to be a second season of My Engineer. But at the same time, having read Space, the Ram King novel, I am pretty happy about that not happening because the novel is. Whew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this all just in my mind is all connecting back, we back to the beginning and everything, we put all of these individuals, we have such a parasocial relationship, and it's all oftentimes, encouraged, let's be real.
Yeah.
They kind of want that.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real,
how they make
all
their
of
money.
us
That's
all
the
of us
industry.
kind of rely on it
Yeah.
to some extent, whether if
Mhm.
you're a content creator in any sort of fashion.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But the industry at large definitely relies on it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, even then, like there are some sects within the BL community that would absolutely rebel if it wasn't true or faithful to the novel.
Yeah.
Um, it's such a complex issue, and I know like I completely agree with you guys, and we should absolutely be adapting these things for the current audience and current mindset. But also know that they're just following the money,
Yeah.
because that there are absolutely those that will not watch it if it's not faithful.
And then I guess you also run into the issue of like how far is too far when changing art.
Yeah.
And like the stories themselves, they're art in their own sense. And so like how far are you, like, does it become something completely different? Like like I don't know if you're following my thought process because I'm not explaining it that well, but like, yeah, how far is completely changing it so it's not the original thing? So why not just create something new? Or is it like something inspired by, or are you actually changing this art and completely like it's not that art piece of art anymore, it's something completely different, and like where's that line?
Yeah. But I think like a lot of these novels getting made into show, even if they because some of them are really different from the original material. I think they rely heavily on the name of it and the idea of it. Like an example with the new ideas of you, the Anne Hathaway
Oh yeah.
movie, which is a book that was previously a fan fiction about Harry Styles, which has gotten the movie a lot of free press, honestly. So like the original, like the origin of the story is kind of pushing the adaptation onwards, if you know what I mean. I think that has a lot to do with how they're more comfortable doing the novels into TV shows, even if they adapt it heavily.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my point was more like, what would you still consider it the original art form if it's that heavily adapted? And like when talking about like purists, I guess you could say, people who are like, no, don't, you shouldn't be changing anything because you're just completely changing the story. Like what their argument is it just completely, it's not the same thing. So like why would you do that opposed to just say that's inspired by and change and like adapt it that way. And like, yes, when you are, yeah, I think my argument's more just like, where's the line when you start to consider these like novels as art forms in their own sense?
Yeah, for me personally, I don't really with romance novels and dramas and stuff. I don't really see an issue if it was more of like a fantasy world, very established world. I would be like more weird about it. Kind of like adapt like Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, all of these shows. Like movies, if you changed a lot in those, I would react because it's established world kind of thing. So I'm more connected to the world that surrounds it than the characters and the essentially the plot too.
Yeah, and so in my argument, the people who view those original novels are viewing it like you do for those worlds. It's their own world and it's got its own rules, and so like
no, just
you would
personally I don't see romance novels that way or have that heavy of connection to the world in romance novels, so I wouldn't react, but I would in fantasy. So I guess it's how you connect to the material.
I mean, I ultimately think. Oops, sorry.
Go ahead.
Ultimately, I see things as there are certain things that you can write and portray in anime or in a novel that you can't, that looks way different whenever you have real people portraying these characters. And I think that's an argument as old as time, quite honestly, since, let's say, Family Guy or something like that, right? Like if you took some of these scenes from these novels that, you know, maybe are pretty interesting in your mind because you're imagining it yourself, you know, well, in the context of reading it, that is a little different than having two real people sitting there actually acting it out.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, no, I think my questions were a bit more rhetorical.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And like just something to think about, like what's the line? Yeah. Because you're right, like, and we've had that conversation before so many times. There's like a difference in written fiction versus visual fiction versus when we get into the BL genre, and this idea of BL isn't just the novel and the series, it's also the couples shipping, the whole marketing aspect of it. Like BL in and of itself has kind of become what K-pop is, which is this big thing that isn't just one thing, it's all of these pieces together that makes BL. Says like there's no right or wrong answer in any of this.
Nope. We're creatures of the gray.
I feel like that's the takeaway. That's definitely the takeaway from this entire conversation.
Well, I did have one final question to kind of finish it out back on the mental health issues in romantic narratives. So we kind of, you know, the tangent kind of came from what are the pitfalls of addressing mental health issues in romantic narratives, but to kind of end it on a positive note, what are the benefits of addressing mental health issues in romantic narratives? So yeah, I guess the big one that we've kind of, again, touched on throughout this discussion is just normalization of things like therapy, of things like medication, of creating discussions around mental health, of showing that people dealing with whatever types of mental health issues are still people who exist normally in society and want to engage in relationships, whether that be romantic, friendship, familial, whatever they may be, that they can still do all those things despite being depressed or having anxiety or having bipolar disorder or whatever it may be, that they're still just normal people who exist in society the same as neurotypical people do, you know? So I think that's one of the biggest benefits that comes from a lot of representation that we see of mental health in the media.
I think also one is that it lends to more depth of plot and stories. Like it makes things more interesting when you have a good mental health into the story. Did that sound
a good depiction, like a good depiction
Thank you.
of
Yeah, it's late.
Yeah.
I've lost words.
Yeah, we understand.
Good.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. I think also agree, and adding on to what everyone said, it's we like to say that BL is fantasy, it's fiction. All the stories we get are all fiction. We like to view it as just stories
Escapism,
that we escapism. Thank you. That's where I was trying to get at. But it is nice to see sometimes in the media that we consume real life issues depicted in a way that is not always true to life, but is true enough to life that that we form bonds is not what I'm trying to say. I'm also not having a good brain moment either. That we connect with. Jesus Christ. It's been a long episode, guys.
Yeah.
We're starting to fall like flies.
Only the Americans remain. the ones in a decent recording time right now.
But my brain is like, oh, it's so late for Pixie. It was so early for me.
Yeah.
I'm proud of us for getting this far.
You guys are troopers and amazing, and we heart you.
But no.
We salute you.
No. But yeah, I think, all of the everything. It makes stories interesting. It makes stories varied. It makes stories not just black and white, but levels of grey and
relatable.
That's relatable, and like that. I personally love that in my fiction, in my media, the varied stories that I can access and engage with and connect with. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It creates empathy too. Empathy, that's a big one. Being empathetic to people who struggle with mental health issues, and just in general empathy for others.
Yeah. We don't
The
have enough of
superpower
that.
that
We
it
need
is.
more. Yeah.
All right. Well, that was a big discussion, a heavy discussion, and I think we ended it in a pretty good place. I feel like there's a lot to unpack with this topic that we really only scratched the surface of in some aspects, so we definitely love to hear all of the viewers and listeners' thoughts on everything. So leave a comment down below or find us on our socials and chat with us there about it. Of course, we have to say a huge thank you to Shawn for joining us today. We really appreciated your insight on everything, and you were 100%
A joy.
a joy. I am also struggling with my words right now. Necessary.
It's bleeding through the screen.
A necessary person to have as part of today's conversation, I think, 100%. So we appreciate you being here.
Including me. Thank you.
Of course. So yeah, everyone be sure to follow Shawn on all his platforms. We'll link them down below, and keep your eye on DramaLlama as well, because big things are obviously coming soon, so you'll want to be following them to keep up with everything. And if you enjoyed this episode, please like, comment, and subscribe. And while you're at it, share the episode with your friends. That all really helps us out with the algorithms on YouTube and the podcasting apps. You can also check out our Patreon for early access to episodes and reviews, as well as a lot of exclusive content over there. But that is all we have for you guys this week. So until next time, bye-bye.
Bye.